record. Awesome, there we go. And we'll be sharing this on the YouTube channel afterward for folks who aren't able to make it live today. Everyone, I believe we all have the ability to unmute. So if you feel comfortable, chatting, asking your question out loud, or if you want to drop it in the chat, would be happy to ask your question to Dr. Levy out loud. Maybe one question to get us started really broadly would be, how do you manage your time and your schedule around so many diverse interests and wanting to always explore more? You mentioned that, residency is obviously a really, really busy schedule. How do you really go out there and explore while still, not burning yourself out?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's honestly something that I have not yet mastered. It's really something I would imagine I would continue to work on for probably the rest of my life. But I think it's been a learning process. Medical school was very intense, like the first 2 years specifically of medical school. It was sort of this feeling of you couldn't study enough, like you could never study enough. It just was a lot of one-on-one time in the library, in addition to classes and small group sessions. But after that, I finished my first 2 years of medical school. It's pretty clinical from then. You have exams, of course, but I think being able to get out of the library and into the hospital and into the clinic was very freeing. So I will say, just looking back and reflecting on my time in medical school, the first 2 years of finding that work-life balance was really challenging. One thing I did that I really strongly encourage for those of you who are interested in going into some pretty study-intensive career paths is making sure you have at least one day off where you do not work and you just use that time to recharge because, we only have a limited amount of energy every day, and it's important that at least one day during the week for me is I used Saturdays where I didn't study and I relaxed and spent time with friends. I think focusing on the things that help you recharge is something, at least from my experience, that has helped me not burn out. So for me, it's a lot of socializing with friends, a lot of just talking with people, cooking with friends, like the things that I know are just going to help me decompress at the end of the day and recharge my energy. Also, I like sleep. I think sleeping is very important. I mean, I do know people who can function on 4 or 5 hours of sleep, but I am not one of those people. So really doing what you can to recharge. But I think for me, I'm someone who I like to intentionally make space for my life outside of work. And being a third-year psychiatry resident, I don't know what that means to some people. So I'll just very, very briefly explain my schedule, which I work in a clinic and it's very steady hours. I work 8 to 5 Monday through Friday, no nights or no weekends. Which is not typical for residency, but that's more indicative of psychiatry. Once we get to our clinic year where we're learning psychotherapy, it's more like office hours type of deal. And then outside of work, I really do try to make time for myself, focusing on self-care, and that can mean something, it can mean a lot of different things. So I love spending time in my garden, reading, listening to podcasts, things that both are related to medicine and psychiatry, but also lots of things that aren't. I think also for me, I'm learning trombone right now and I'm taking trombone lessons. So learning a new instrument is something that it's exciting for me. I play in a marching band here in New Orleans. And just having these outlets outside of work and such a long career path, it to me is, I don't think I could have gotten through it without having these outlets. And yoga's been my friend too. And I'm just rambling at this point, but I mean, I do have a lot to say on it because I think self-care and well-being and having a balanced lifestyle is so important and not something that I ever learned in medical school or in college. It wasn't really modeled for me. I think being a pre-med student, I went to University of Michigan, which is a very large school, and being pre-med, it's very competitive and the balance is not encouraged. It's really sort of, you're encouraged to study as much as possible and work as hard as you can, which I think is good, but that balance again is not emphasized. So I just can't emphasize it enough. Just having your own outlets that you can sort of use to decompress and recharge, whatever that means for you, is going to really be your best friend while going through some pretty challenging career, school, and then like also career challenges as well.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think that's self-care, especially among the pre-med population, is definitely one of those things that is very underrated. So I think definitely valuable for all of us here to hear that from someone who's a working professional right now.
Yeah. There is a question in the chat. What high school and or college course benefited you the most for your career? That's a great question. It's a hard question to answer. The course that stands out to me in college is something that really sort of shifted my interest and challenged what I thought I would do was a parasitology class because I was so fascinated with it. And that ended up dictating why I moved to New Orleans because the Tulane School of Public Health and Tropical Medicine has, to my understanding, the only tropical medicine and parasitology program in the country. So because I had been so fascinated by the parasitology course in college, which by the way was part of my pre-med, I had to do one elective. And I could choose whatever I wanted, and I chose parasitology, and I just thought it was really fascinating. And then it helped segue my career into public health and now public psychiatry. So you might at first not think that parasitology and psychiatry coincide, which I think on the surface level they don't so much, but there's so much nuance there. And at least in my own path, learning about parasites, learning about public health, learning about healthcare systems, tying that in with mental health, like it makes a lot of sense for me. But I think it's a good example of something that, you know, you sort of take an elective to check off that box, and then it can really steer things in a different direction. I also will say that something cool, I did a talk a couple years ago to the residents at Tulane. We have something called the Medicine Psychiatry Conference. And I did a talk on toxoplasmosis gondii, or Toxoplasma gondii rather, and its implications and correlation with schizophrenia. So that's, I think, just like a really good example of tying in infectious disease and parasitology with mental health and with psychiatry. There's a lot of research out there on that subject. So that's just something that comes to mind. Like, you can use, even though I'm not practicing parasitology or, you know, working in a lab, I can still use my knowledge of infectious disease and parasites when I think about the whole spectrum of mental health conditions and all the different, at least with schizophrenia, all the different causes that exist. So just like a little tidbit of being able to tie in multiple interests. And so that's really the class that sticks out to me the most, just because it was so unique. I'm trying to think what else. In high school, Gosh, I don't know. I feel like it's been so long since I was in high school. I don't know. Nothing that really stuck out to me is as being something that, helped, that I benefited from the most in my career. But yeah, I hope that answers the question. Okay, there is another question here that says, there is a nugget of information you could pop into everyone's head. What would it be? It's a good question. I would say, I really do think going back to the whole self-care talk is so important, and being true to yourself, making sure that whatever you're interested in terms of science and, whatever your interest might be, just keeping an open mind for continuing the hobbies that you have from childhood and beyond, and making room to explore new hobbies and new interests. I just think it really helps to be a well-rounded person. It's helped me decompress a lot outside of work, because as you can imagine, working in psychiatry can be really heavy, and I work with really sick patients who do have some pretty heavy and just difficult lives. And so being able to have that outlet is so important. Another thing I will say, and this is pretty universal regardless of what people are interested in specifically, I would say don't let a bad test score crush your dreams of going into the career that you want to go into. And I can just speak from my own experience here, but I did not do well on the MCAT. I didn't do what I was told was good enough to get into medical school. Like I took it again, so I took it twice, and did a little bit better the second time, but it wasn't a competitive score by no means at all. And even though my grades in college were good, my grades in philosophy were markedly always better than they were in these like 1,000 person organic chemistry classes where it's so competitive. I just will say, just because you're not at the tip top of your class or having a competitive MCAT score or whatever, the numbers are for you, don't convince yourself that it's not possible for you to go into medical school. And in the introduction, you probably heard I went to medical school in Australia, which is not a typical path for most people here in the United States. Basically, I went there because, one, it's in Australia and it's a whole different healthcare system with so much to be learned from, but also I got in and I took it. And I could have waited to apply, or rather to hear back from other medical schools that I applied to, but as soon as I got in, I went for it. And I would just say, like, that's another example of, putting yourself out there, trying. And even though like I didn't have the best MCAT scores, I was able to get into medical school, and you make it work. Like if you want to do this, don't let a number convince you not to, is I think the best takeaway.
I think it'd be really interesting to hear more about your experiences studying in a completely different country and learning more about the healthcare system in Australia. Did you find any sort of sociocultural differences in interacting with patients, or just the way that the system was structured, maybe on the insurance billing side or anything like that? How did you navigate that completely new world?
Yeah, it's interesting. The biggest thing that I learned is that it seems like the government has an interest in taking care of people. And it's because there is a public health, like universal healthcare system there. Just as an example, It's illegal to ride your bicycle without a helmet. Because I mean, if you think about it from just a broad standpoint, the government they have an interest in you being well, because otherwise they're going to be paying for it, you know. So that was just a whole different approach, I think, to people's well-being. Like here, at least in New Orleans, people don't typically wear helmets. I don't know, just like it's a very, maybe New Orleans is a unique example, but people are not the healthiest here. And I think if they knew that the government, you know, had an interest in taking care of them and would pay for their health care if something bad happened, I think people, I don't know, it might change people's minds in terms of the way they approach their own well-being and their own health. So that was one, just like being in a totally different approach to health. Two, people utilize health services much more there than they do here, because they can access it, and money is not the biggest barrier often. So people go to the doctor. Not to say that like everyone in Australia goes to the doctor, people here don't, but it's much more accessible and transparent. Just to be able to go to your general practitioner or go to the hospital. Whereas I see really often people don't access healthcare because they can't pay for it here. And that's something I'm sure we've all experienced and at least seen or heard stories about or read in the news. And that's much less an issue there. And then when it comes to mental health specifically, Australia does an amazing job at something called early psychosis intervention. So at least in schizophrenia, it is a chronic disease. And the research, we know now from research that the earlier you can treat the disease, the better the prognosis. So for example, if someone has a first break psychotic episode at age 20, if it gets treated then and there, and the sooner it can get treated, the better outcome that person might have. Let's say if they don't access treatment for like 10 or 15 years or something like that. So they have an amazing public health approach to psychosis, and the country is one of the leaders in the world for that. So just to be able to see how that works and see these destigmatizing public health campaigns in action was really cool. And that's changing here in our country as well. Like there are more early intervention psychosis programs. There's more emphasis being played on it now, but Australia was one of the leaders in that. So that was really cool to see. Yeah, they do have quite a destigmatizing approach to mental health there through public health campaigns, which I think some cities here in the United States do a much better job than other cities. So it is regionally dependent, but that was something I noticed as well. Okay, there's another question. Did studying philosophy affect how you saw what you learned in medical school and later? Do you think the order you pursued different interests in matter? That's a really good question. I think studying philosophy absolutely impacted my medical school experience, and I think the most obvious way would be from a bioethics standpoint, because ethics is such a crux of philosophy. And I did take a few courses in applied ethics during my undergrad, and just the way you're able to approach different subjects in medicine, like ethical issues. Philosophy helped so much for that, to be able to think critically about very complex ethical issues. And it's such a core feature of medicine. Our patients are complex, and we often are put in situations to make really, really difficult decisions. And having that ethics background was really helpful for that. But also, I think it helped me from more of like a humanities and like non-hard science perspective to just approach medicine and approach studying from a little bit of a different vantage point. I think like my friends in medical school who were hard science majors, like majored in physics or biology, it's almost like your brain is conditioned a little bit differently from studying philosophy, where it makes sense to me now that I went into psychiatry because you really, I mean, any part in medicine, you have to think so critically, but psychiatry is just, it's abstract. And I think having that, it's abstract and it's not, but having that background in studying very abstract concepts from philosophy really just helped shape my approach, and does, to this day, it helps shape my approach to patients and discussing abstract concepts. And for me, really, it sparks my interest. So it's almost like a selfish thing also, but yeah. And then I think there was another part to that question. Do you think the order you pursued different interests in mattered? I don't know. I'm not sure. I wonder if I reflect back on it, if I would have done anything differently. I think I was just sort of on this weaving snake path trying to figure out what I wanted to do for a while. And that is okay. There's no rush. That's another nugget of information to take away. There's no rush to jumping into going to medical school. I went to medical school when I started medical school when I was 26 or 27, and I had some classmates who were 22, and I had classmates who were nearly 50. And I really have to say, the people older than me, and people who had more life experience before going to medical school, one had a lot more maturity, and I think a lot more of an ability to relate to patients, more life experience. So that's also really helpful. Just know that there's no rush. I think in college, academic advisors will sort of like steer you in one direction, like, okay, you do these courses, you take the MCAT, you apply to medical school. There's no manual for taking 10 years off and going to medical school. But I just encourage everyone to take your time and do things you're interested in. Yeah, that's really important. So I don't know that the order I did things in really mattered, but it helped me ultimately find an area within science that I could combine different interests of mine and do something that I really, really enjoyed doing. So yeah, I just wonder if I did it in a different order, if might not have found, I definitely wouldn't be where I am today, but I just wonder if I wouldn't have been able to combine all these different interests together. Okay, were there any culture shocks you experienced when you went to medical school? If so, what surprised you the most? Okay, so going to medical school in Australia, it kind of felt like an alternate universe of the United States. Like, it was like I was in the US, but everything was a little bit different. Like, just, you ride on the other side of the road, and people have a funny accent and things like that. So it felt very similarly from a cultural perspective, like similar to US Western culture. Some people that I went to medical school with say that it was less of a culture shock for them to move to Australia and more of a culture shock to move to New Orleans, which is interesting that you could experience more of a culture shock within your own country than you would in a totally different part of the world. But I think something that was different for me in terms of culture was a couple things. One, this is really minor, but the education system is a little bit different there. So I had peers who were 20 years old because they're able to do 2 years of undergrad and go straight into medical school. That's pretty normal in Australia. So some of my peers were really young, like almost just out of high school. That was sort of just, I mean, we don't have that here in the US. Like you have to complete 4 years of, to my understanding, you have to complete 4 years of undergrad to apply to medical school. So that was different. Another culture shock was just how polite everyone is there. I think like it's like people are, it's not that they're formal, it's just people really follow the rules. And I think that goes back to like the universal health care and the public health system they have there. I was living in New Orleans before I moved to Australia, and people run red lights here, and people don't follow the rules. Go to Australia and no one jaywalks, and people are very, I don't know, it was just different. People actually followed the rules, and that was a big culture shock for me, which sounds funny. It is kind of funny. Alrighty. Let's see. When did you decide that the medical path or field was the one for you? It's a great question. I think it was for me about like a 10-year decision making process, to be honest. I was not someone who was dead set on being a doctor from, age 7. Like you hear a lot of people who know they want to do this specific thing and that's their goal and that's their dream. I wasn't like that. I did always know I wanted to work with people and help people in whatever, and I love science. I always have, and I think those were my my foundation. Wanting to help people and like do some good in the world, and using science in some way. So naturally medicine makes sense. And when I entered into undergrad, I had the intention of being pre-med. So I I signed up for all the pre-med courses, and sort of was like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to keep this door open. If I choose to go to medical school, great. If I don't, I'm sure I'll find something else that I am passionate about and I love very much. And I really do think I would have been happy going down like a PhD route and doing more of like a hard science research based career in public health. But working in a lab, I worked in an entomology lab with mosquitoes here in New Orleans while I was in public health school. And I think that experience helped me decide to go to medical school, because I realized I don't want to work in a lab forever. I want to work with people and their families. It's almost by like process of elimination, it helped me decide to go into medicine ultimately. So it's like I was on this trajectory of being pre-med, decided I was not ready to go to medical school right after college. I did something totally different in Israel and worked at a free clinic there, which helped guide me into going into public health. And then I think that process of elimination, sort of in a lab and working in a lab, made me realize that I'm more of a people person than like a lab person. And just having that experience helped make me realize that, actually I do want to go to medical school. And so I applied to medical school during public health school. So that was sort of how it worked for me. It was like, okay, not going to work in a lab forever, so I'll try something else and go with that. A lot of trial and error, as you can imagine. Okay, there's another question here that says, after graduation, if we want to make career in a neuroscience field, then what should we do? Like where to apply for further studies? That's a great question. I think master's programs are really, really wonderful. Like me doing my master's in public health, I would have a completely different approach to psychiatry and to medicine if I didn't have that background. And being able to have a master's experience in a field that you're interested in, such as neuroscience, is so helpful. You can get that research experience, you can get the mentorship, You can start networking with people in whatever city you're in, networking with other neuroscientists. So, and you say after graduation, I don't know if that is after high school graduation or college graduation, but I'd say after college graduation, I would really strongly consider applying for master's programs. Because if you end up finding an area within neuroscience that you're passionate about, you can make it into a PhD and get your doctorate. Those doors are open for you. So the more that you open those doors for yourself and keep those doors open, the more you can do with your interests in neuroscience. It's a huge field and it's so ever changing. So I would encourage you to apply. And I don't know specifics about neuroscience master's programs, so I can't speak on that. But I would talk to an academic advisor or maybe talk to a neuroscience professor and just start networking with those people in the field so you can get a better sense of what master's programs might look like. And then there's another question. Okay, currently an undergrad at the University of Delhi. Would love to know about your experience and work here in Delhi. Amazing. Okay. Yeah, it was a long time ago. It was 13 years ago now that I was there, which makes me feel very old. But I love Hindustani classical music, and I had for a long time. And that, I think, was a huge reason, or just an attraction to going to India. I wanted to learn a new instrument and just wanted to immerse myself. I knew I wanted to go to a country that was not white. I had only ever lived in the United States, which is majority white. And I wanted an experience of immersing myself in a different culture and specifically a non-white culture. And so those were the biggest reasons why I went, why I wanted to go to India. And obviously the food. I really love Indian food. I learned so much from being there. I really like the analogy. It's like if you can imagine drawing, a border around Europe and saying it's one country. That's kind of like how India is, right? Every state is so unique and so different. And it's almost comical that it's one country because it's just so diverse. I just think being in a completely different culture and plopping yourself into a very foreign and unknown territory was one of the best growth experiences I had for myself. So when I was in Delhi, I lived in South Delhi in a neighborhood called Meetibag, which I think is actually close to the University of Delhi. I think so. But I did classes at JNU. So I took a rickshaw to classes. I took a philosophy class, a Hindi class, a class on women in film, and also on the history of Delhi. And that course was really neat because we would actually visit the sites of ruins of different empires, and basically it was like learning history directly through little field trips, which was so cool. I really just can't emphasize how much studying abroad in such a different culture impacted me. It really just it just opened my mind to how other people live. Like, we're so sheltered and in a bubble here. At least, I was in Chicago and in Michigan, so it was really helpful. I loved it. I loved being able to take trips and go to my sitar lessons. It was an amazing experience. So I was there for 5 months. So that was my experience in Delhi. It was in 2008, so it was quite a while ago. But I loved it. I really want to go back, and I've actually been trying to think of how I can go back to India. It would be really lovely. So thank you for asking that question. I didn't do any medical related work there though. So I used it as like sort of a humanities semester. And I will say on that, a lot of people who go into medicine or are pre-med don't want to study abroad because of the number of courses that you need for pre-med. So I will say one other thing that I did is I would take one prerequisite course every summer. So I did like physics one summer. I think I did physics for 2 summers and like another pre-med course another summer. And that way I was able to use a semester in my undergrad to just study whatever I wanted to study and not worry about pre-med requirements. So that was how I did that. And I think it worked out well. I'm very grateful that I was able to take that semester abroad. Okay, how did you look for schools in other countries? I've thought about the possibility of going to grad school in other countries, but I didn't know how to do that. Great question. I will say I also applied to public health school in Jerusalem. And I ended up not going for a variety of reasons. But I think for that program, I heard about it from someone. And the medical school I went to, I literally met someone in New Orleans who went to the medical school, and that's how I heard about it. So just like randomly connecting with people and networking with people is how I learned about the 2 programs abroad that I was interested in. So I don't know. I don't know if there's like a great way other than just sort of putting yourself out there and talking to people who may have done master's programs in other countries. It totally depends on what you want to study. I would just say start Googling like whatever master's program you're interested in a country you're interested in, see what comes up. Also see what's taught in English, unless you speak a specific language that, you'd want to go to that country specifically for. But I would just say like start networking, ask people who have done grad school in different countries, and go from there. And just Google, do what you can. So yeah, I'd try that. And okay, can we switch to clinical studies and psychology research for PhDs after doing basic neuroscience research? What one should keep in mind while applying for such programs? I actually don't know. That's a great question. I am not sure how that works. If you're like a psychology PhD candidate. Oh, okay. Let's see. I think what you're asking is that if you're doing basic neuroscience research, can you switch to clinical studies? I'm not sure exactly if that's what you mean, but to be honest, I don't know. I wish I knew. I'm not sure how that works. I feel like it would be very specific to whatever program you're interested in doing and how much they might be able to work with you based on your background. Oh, cool. You posted this website, the IBRO. Amazing. And then there was one other question. What has been a highlight of your clinical experience? A highlight of my clinical experience is getting to know my patients and their families. It is awesome. I think it's the coolest part about medicine is building relationships with your patients, building that sense of trust and community. So I've been working with some patients for a couple of years now, which is nothing. I mean, there are doctors who work with patients for decades, and I'll hopefully be there at some point. But even just working with people for 2 years and, knowing their siblings or knowing their parents, it's really great. I feel like I'm connected to them, and I feel like I am a helpful and positive part of their life. And, they are to me as well. They're helping me learn and grow. And that's been my most rewarding experience in medicine. Not, being able to prescribe medications or learning fancy psychopharmacology. That all is great. I love learning new things, and I think we all do. We're here for that reason, probably, because we're interested in continuing learning for the rest of our lives. But really just making those human connections has been the most rewarding thing. I appreciate everyone has been asking such great questions. Thank you, everyone. This has been great. I'm almost blushing.
And if we may know one last question before maybe it's getting too late, what is the future looking like for you post-residency? Are you thinking of fellowships or what route you may want to go career-wise?
Yeah, great question. I am applying for a fellowship. That's probably what I'm going to work on later today, is work on some essays for a fellowship in community psychiatry, or it's also called public psychiatry. And it's pretty niche even within psychiatry, but basically what it will help me do is learn more skills of how to best serve people with complex issues who have severe mental illness, who utilize the public sector. So people, let's say, who don't have loads of money to be able to, pay for their fancy psychiatrist or whatever. It's people who rely on the public mental health system, who are very sick. So that's what my fellowship will entail, is not only clinical learning, but also learning advocacy and policy, fundraising, finances, all the stuff that you don't learn in residency. So my goal is to do that fellowship for a year, and then start working in New Orleans. I want to work for an assertive community treatment team. So it's doctors and nurses and social workers who make house calls to the sickest of the sick patients. So we go and see them rather than them coming to see us. So I want to work for that, and I'm hoping I want to start a nonprofit here, or reinstate something called a clubhouse, which is, we could talk about for a long time, but it's sort of like a drop-in center for people with severe mental illness. So I want to do what I can to build up mental health resources in New Orleans. So that's my goal.
So much for sharing. That sounds really neat. It'll be really exciting to see what's going to be taking place over the next few years.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see.
Fingers crossed.
I know, and I'm like, oh gosh, I don't want to become a workaholic or work too much. I like working because I like doing things. I like doing good things, but yeah, I don't want to be a workaholic.
Balance. That's super neat though. Thank you so much for your time and for answering all those questions, for being such a vibrant person, and your time today. Yeah, thank you so much everyone for your questions as well. Those are really wonderful. Any last parting thoughts you would like to share with us? Any last parting advice you would like to share?
I just want to put my email here. In case anyone wants to reach out to me, like if you do have specific questions, like especially about medicine, I might be able to help you, or grad school, just feel free to reach out. I am happy to connect. And, if I can't answer your question, at least might be able to send you in the right direction. But yeah, definitely feel free, anyone, to reach out.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Alrighty, and apologies for being late. Thank you everyone who stayed on to wait. I enjoyed this. So yeah, good luck to everyone, and don't hesitate to reach out.
Thanks so much, Dr. Levy. Thanks everyone for joining. Have a great rest of your day, folks.
Bye.